The discovery of gold on the Feather River in 1863 touched off a new rush to what became known as the South Boise Diggings. This area encompasses the middle fork of the Boise River on the north and the south fork of the Boise River on the south. It is a country of high mountain peaks, small valleys, gulches, and streams of every size. The ghost town of Rocky Bar is in a small gulch where houses and barns once lined both sides of the road for about 2 miles. Lost to us are the towns of Esmeralda and Happy Camp, but traces still remain of Spanish Town and Wide West. With the largest mines nearby on Bear Creek, Rocky Bar quickly became the leading settlement for the South Boise miners. In 1864, with a population of nearly 2,500, it became the county seat of Alturas County. Along with Idaho City, Rocky Bar was a contender for the site of the territorial capital. When Alturas County was created in 1864, the first territorial legislature designated Esmeralda as the county seat. But since Esmeralda wasn't much of a town and Rocky Bar was starting to boom, the county officials quickly moved their office up to Rocky Bar. This honor was held by Rocky Bar until 1881, when Hiler won the election and became the county seat of Alturas County. The town of Rocky Bar was established in December 1863 by H. Comstock, the namesake of the Comstock Lode in Nevada. Comstock remained in Rocky Bar long enough to see it grow and himself become famous from the Pacific coast to New York and London. Then he left town and was lost to history. The greatest part of the gold produced at the Rocky Bar mines in 1863 was through placer mining. During that first summer, Comstock's Elmore mine turned out 7 tons of ore at $347 per ton. The Idaho, the original lode discovery, was valued so highly as not to be for sale at any price. In 1864, Julius Newberg's Wagon Road Company began construction of a toll road to Rocky Bar. Completed in September of the same year, it was cause for great rejoicing. The only heavy equipment that was packed into Rocky Bar before the toll road was a steam mill and a small 5-stamp quartz mill. Before the end of 1864, 6 more stamp mills were under construction. Mining histories and reports seldom include anything but mining facts. There were, however, families, women and children all doing their part to make a life in this rugged country. Tragedies were very much a part of life in those days too, the most noted being that of Peg-Leg Annie Morrow. Born in 1860, Annie came to Rocky Bar with her father at the age of 4 in a pack on his back. She attended school in Rocky Bar until the age of 14 when she married a man named Morrow. He was reportedly a cruel husband and in a few years vanished. Annie became the owner of a restaurant and rooming house. Keeping order in her establishment was no problem for Annie. When trouble brewed, she brandished a pistol. If Annie was respected for being tough, she was also loved for her generosity and compassion. These qualities cost Annie her legs. On a Friday night in the early spring of 1899, Annie agreed to walk across Bald Mountain with her friend Dutch M., who was leaving the territory. To bolster themselves for the long walk, the women imbibed in spirits. 5 miles out, a fierce blizzard blew up. Bill Tate, who had the mail contract to Atlanta, found their tracks early the next morning on James Creek. He warned them to turn back, but they insisted, "We'll make it or die." Friday being payday in the mines, Annie and Dutch M. were in a hurry to get to Rocky Bar and the generous miners. Spending little time at the cabin where Tate had left them, the pair started out and made a wrong turn at Little Baldy Mountain. This was Saturday night. They had been wallowing in 3 to 4 feet of fresh snow. Hampered by the alcohol, they stumbled toward what was thought to be a cabin at the summit. Instead, they found a large rock. Monday morning, Tate set out to find the luckless pair. "I could have found my way out," Annie is quoted later as saying, "but Em couldn't make it, so I stayed with her. I took my underclothes off to cover her with. Then I stayed with her, thinking maybe somebody would find us right away." That somebody was Bill Tate, but not until Monday morning. The girls had a dog with them and would have undoubtedly froze to death the first night out, but for the warmth provided by the big Newfoundland. Em died the second night out. They found Annie crawling, half frozen and incoherent. By this time, John had arrived, so they took Annie back to the aforementioned cabin. She had eaten nothing for 3 days. Annie said she knew she was froze, but didn't know how high up. Annie vowed she could ski to Rocky Bar, froze or not. She made it, and then waited 2 days for Tate to bring Doc Newkirk in to cut her legs off. 5 or 6 men were sent from Rocky Bar to recover the body of Dutch M. They got drunk and couldn't find her. Then a second party was sent from Atlanta to recover the body with no luck. Tate found Em in the hole where Annie had left her, leaning against a tree, stiff as a poker. Tate said she looked real nice, except for the holes pecked in her cheeks by some birds. Em was taken to the now notorious cabin, and 6 more men were sent up to bring her down the hill. The men slipped in the snow, and Em got away from them, sliding into an air hole in the creek. Tate again was called upon to make a rescue. He retrieved Em from the creek and brought her back to town, where she was at last buried. Time passed, and Annie began living with a saloon keeper named Henry Longhenny. When he left her with all her savings 22 years later, Annie's generous spirit refused to believe he had betrayed her. Annie's ill luck more or less followed her for the rest of her life. She eventually succumbed to cancer, died in 1935, and was buried at Morris Hill Cemetery in Boise. In 1892, much of Rocky Bar was wiped out by fire, but the town was soon rebuilt and mining continued. A large Chinese settlement hugged the banks along Steel Creek. Mining interests have closed and reopened numerous mines in the Rocky Bar area since its beginning. Small-scale operations have continued to the present. In 1911, fire again destroyed several buildings in Rocky Bar. The houses that burned were all on the north side of the street. Those on the south side were saved by wet blankets being hung in front of them and drenched by buckets of water. The resulting vacant places eventually became a rich garden spot, hay and grain field. Resident Billy Nixon once heard to tell a youngster, "This ground is so full of broken glass that when we dig the potatoes, they're already sliced." Well into the 20th century, the Elmore Hotel was the only place for food and lodging in town. An old-timer who will long be remembered for his generous community spirit was Charlie Spriddles. In the 30s, Charlie moved from his mining claim on Elk Creek to town, where he operated a store and gas pump. Charlie was quite a promoter and always had the welfare of the young people in mind. One summer, he imported baseball players from Mountain Home and Glens Ferry to play against the Atlanta team at the Baseball Diamond in Atlanta. In later years, he started what was called Old Timers Day, held each year on the Sunday before Labor Day, welcoming residents, tourists, and any old-timers to the feed he provided. Charlie had many friends, and some of them were pilots stationed at Mountain Home Air Force Base, who would occasionally fly over his cabin while he was snowed in for the winter to drop some mail and fresh meat. Charlie's wish was to be buried at Rocky Bar near his place, but that did not happen. He didn't make it back after a trip to Mountain Home in December of 1963, and was found in April after most of the snow had melted. The memorial sign in his honor is mounted not far from Wide West Gulch, near where his body was found. The Dutchman's Bar and Cafe gas station were open for many years, and then the business became Tina and Ed's Bar and Grill. They were finally forced to move off the premises so mining operations could once again resume. Growing up in Rocky Bar left fond memories for many folks, but with the death of Charlie Spriddles, Rocky Bar's last wintertime resident, the deep snows and wintry winds have this old camp all to themselves. On the 5th of July, 1863, 23 prospectors left the gold camp of Warrens to prospect the upper tributaries of the South Fork of the Salmon River. This party made discoveries and named the location Stanley Basin after Captain John Stanley, the eldest member of the party. Here the group split. 13 returned to Warrens. Stanley and his party pushed on, searching for a pass through the mountains that would lead them to Boise Basin. The party discovered gold after heading over the Sawtooth Range into the Middle Fork of the Boise River. Arriving in thriving Idaho City in early August, Stanley's party tried to keep all its discoveries secret. Suspicious prospectors left Idaho City after August 8th in search of Stanley's discoveries, but returned disappointed within a week. By April 1864, prospectors had left for Stanley Basin, leaving Stanley's party to prospect on in secrecy. Following up the gravel bars in Quartz Creek, John Simmons made an astonishing discovery in November. Called originally the Eagle of Light, after the Nez Perce leader who opposed white miners in North Idaho, this discovery eventually became Idaho's major gold mine. Confederate sympathizers renamed the discovery Atlanta, after the southern city that had just been destroyed by General Sherman during his march to the sea. The extraordinary richness of the new discovery attracted a rush to Atlanta during November. Additional discoveries were staked for 2 miles along the lode. The most important parts of the vein became known as the Old Chunk, the Central, Pettit, Monarch, Buffalo, and the Atlanta. About 40 miners spent the extremely hard and long winter of 1864-65 on the Yuba River. Nelson Davis and his partners built a log cabin about a mile downstream from Atlanta and spent the first winter there. For a few years, arrastra and some limited small-scale stamp milling were the only types of mining carried on in the Atlanta area, with the first large-scale stamp milling being done during the summer of 1867. By the end of 1869, the richest ores had been gouged from shallow workings. Several mills ground to a halt, and gloom descended over Atlanta. The first federal census was recorded in Atlanta on June 1, 1870. The town had 72 citizens. 47 people were under age 40. 25 citizens had been born in foreign countries. Atlantans were Irish, German, English, Chinese, Swiss, French, Finnish, Canadians, Greek, and Mexican. When Rolf Budsor completed the long-awaited wagon road from Rocky Bar in 1878, Atlanta seemed in a position to realize some of its early promise. This original road was so steep from Camp Gulch down to Yuba that wagons were let down by ropes and chains. Mining activities have waxed and waned in the Atlanta district all through its history. In 1884, the town suffered a near collapse with the close of the Tahoma mine. The Tri-Weekly Statesman recorded, "The old mining town of Atlanta is almost abandoned. The 13 business firms which existed there 6 months ago are reduced to one solitary saloon keeper. Less than 50 persons will winter there, and those simply to care for the expensive mining works which stand as idle monuments of a once thrifty town." For the next 15 years, there was little mining activity in Atlanta. To further hinder the district, most of Rocky Bar was destroyed by fire in July 1892. In June of 1892, the old Buffalo Mill below Atlanta was also destroyed by fire. A Chinese cook named Ho Hope was blamed for the incendiary fire and disappeared mysteriously the night of the fire. The Chinese population of the district became fearful for their lives. Social activities continued despite the continual boom and bust of the mines. In May of 1885, A.S. Abbott published the first edition of the Atlanta News, Atlanta's first published newspaper. In the summer of 1885, pioneer J.H. Casey built a large 2-story hall with a white painted front on Quartz Street. For years, this building was the center for the community's social activities. The building had a stage and functioned through several mining revivals. Plays, rallies, dances, and church services were held there. The hall was torn down, like many other historic buildings, in the 1960s. In 1885, a mail route was also established between Atlanta and Sawtooth City. At the turn of the century, a third revival began. The Atlanta Mine Company resumed operating the Monarch Mill in 1902. An aerial tram 1 3/4 miles long to carry ore from the mine to the mill was completed in 1906. The Baghdad Chase Company installed a hydroelectric plant on the Yuba River 2 years later. In March of that same year, a large fire destroyed the Atlanta Hotel, Butler's store, and the Greylock Saloon. Sheriff W.R. Butler's home and barber shop were set on fire by an arsonist in May of 1910. On June 5th, the town jail was burned, and on June 15th, the 3-story Knights of Pythias Hall and 2 adjoining homes burned to the ground. Atlanta was on the verge of a lynching until Sheriff Butler and 13 deputized men controlled a gang of rowdies who were attempting to take over the town. While the rest of the nation plunged into the depression of the 1930s, Atlanta began another boom. A new modern mill equipped with flotation was in operation by February 1932. Flotation made a 90% recovery possible. Atlanta once again became the leading gold producer in the state. During World War II, women took over many of the mining operations. Lumbering and tourism have helped keep the town alive since. Summer tourists can find several eating establishments and a picnic ground provided by the United States Forest Service. An Atlanta Historical Society has been established by its residents for the active preservation and restoration of the town's rich and colorful history. The ghosts which have taken over so many old mining communities have been kept at bay in Atlanta.